Alright guys, we're back. In the last video we got the engine in. I now have all the bolts torqued down, the engine mounting bolts. I installed the sprocket as well as the sprocket cover, routed my clutch line, installed the radiator, the exhaust system, all my hoses, ignition coils and spark plug wires. Pretty much have this almost all buttoned up. Like I said in the last video, I have to just refresh those carburetors because if you remember back in the beginning, and I can attach a link somewhere, back in the beginning of this build series, or rebuild series, I had a runnability problem and it wasn't running quite right, and came down to the carburetor needing some work. So I'm going to show you how you can look over a carburetor if that's something you want to do. But I'm just going to do a brief overview of the carburetor, and then we're going to install it on the bike, put the air box on, and we're actually going to fire this thing up and see if it goes through all the gears and see if it makes any weird noises. But yeah, let's get started. First thing we're going to do again is we're going to look over that carburetor, and then I'm going to clean it, install it, and then we're going to hopefully start this thing up and button it back up and head on down the road. Alrighty, so this is a controlled fuel leak, and the way it's controlled, fuel comes in the carburetor here through the fuel hose from the fuel tank or fuel pump, comes down through here into the carburetor. This little brass fitting here in conjunction with this, which is called the float valve, allows the fuel to flow in and stop flowing. So there's a little rubber tip on here, and as that drops down, it allows fuel to come in. As it lifts up, it stops the fuel flow. So if you have a problem where your bike is just constantly streaming fuel out of it, that means that there's probably an issue with your fuel valve or this little guy here, which is your float. Now your float is what controls that fuel valve going up and down. It's called a float because it floats on top of gasoline. If you imagine my pinky being gasoline under here, the more gasoline you get in, the higher the float goes up. The higher it goes up, the more it pushes up on this valve and subsequently shuts the flow of fuel off. Now either this valve can be bad, dirt can get between this rubber seal here and this opening in here, or this float can go bad, it can get a pinhole in it, fill up with fuel and never rise, so in essence never shut off. So that's how the fuel is controlled coming in. And those are a couple little things that can go wrong with that. From there, goes into the float bowl. Again, that's what fills up with fuel and raises and lowers that fuel valve. All right, now to control the slow speed circuit, you have a slow speed jet or pilot jet here. This is the smallest opening of jets that you have in your carburetor. Their main control is your idle and just off idle. I'd say up to about 10% throttle is what they are in charge of. Now since it's a controlled fuel leak, we don't just bring fuel through here and everything's okay. The fuel flows through here, and then just before it goes into the engine, it goes past this mixture screw here. Now all this mixture screw is it's just a real fine needle, and as you turn it in or turn it out, it adjusts how rich or how lean your fuel mixture is in your carburetor. So most of the time, you don't have to mess with these mixture screws. They come factory set, so it's basically a once and done thing. If you modify your engine or your bike with an air filter or exhaust, you are going to have to mess with both this as well as this slow speed jet. These are the most common things to get gummed up and cause a poor idling condition. So if your bike doesn't idle, good chance that it's your slow speed jet causing that problem. It's just going to be dirt in there. Now when you clean this out, the only thing you should clean this out with is either a very strong carburetor cleaner. Something like this will work too. You can just drop all your carburetor parts in here and that'll clean that stuff out. One thing you don't ever want to do is put anything in here to clean this jet out. When you look through here, see if I can pick it up on camera. just a real tiny hole. And if you go probing that with anything, it's just brass, it'll make that hole larger than it needs to be, and it'll actually affect how the bike runs. So if you're cleaning this out, the only thing you do is use chemicals. If it doesn't clean out, then replace it. Simple as that. All right, so moving along, we then come up to this little guy here. This little guy is comprised of this as well as this. This, in most terms, is called an emulsion tube. Basically, it takes your anything above 10% throttle, and your fuel will flow through this. Well, it'll start through here, which is your main jet. Now, if you look comparatively to that last jet, that hole is a lot larger. So this is in charge of your above 10% all the way up to 100% throttle. This is what this controls. This is pretty much how you meter anything between 10 and I'd say about 85% throttle. This combined with this, which is the needle. Now, there are books to actually look and see how each individual part at each individual throttle percentage work. The only thing you're worried about if you're cleaning this is that this hole is clean. And again, you don't want to stick anything in there that's larger than that hole. You just want to clean that out with chemicals. And then this here, you want to make sure that not only you could see through this. Oh, yeah, see, so this one's not one that you can see through. This one here, what you want to be focused on is making sure that these are free and clear, these holes on the side. Because this, as you can see, does not go straight through. The fuel actually goes in through the bottom here, and then it flows out of these holes here on the side. All right, and then it goes up through the carburetor, and you just want to make sure that when you're cleaning it, that you're cleaning out all this stuff with chemicals, not jamming anything in there. I know, but that's pretty much how the carburetor works. It's probably a crappy explanation of everything, but you get a general idea of how the carburetors work and what you need to focus on. One of the main things that I always tell people is just keep it organized. I mean, if you can, try and work on them one at a time. So even something like this might be overwhelming to somebody. You don't have to take this all the way apart. You could just take one carburetor apart, move on to the next one, move on to the next one, move on to the next one. And as long as you keep everything organized and you have a good manual to tell you where everything is and how everything should be set up, you shouldn't have any problem rebuilding these carburetors. So these weren't that bad. The only thing I had to worry about are these pilot jets. They're dirty. I'm going to clean them out. While I'm there, I'm just going to dip everything else in the tank, and that should deal with my poor idling issue. But that's carburetors summed up to a certain extent. Alrighty, so our carburetors are reassembled. Now before I stick them back in the bike, there's something I always like to do with carburetors. That is, I like to give them a dry run. So if you see, I have this fuel line hooked up here to an IV. Comes down to the carburetor. Just going to turn this on. And the carburetors should fill up with fuel, and we should have no leaks. I like to do this before I put it in the bike because this is the time I want to see that they leak, because then I can fix it right away. Now the other thing I like to do is I like to make sure that all our slides are going to work like they're supposed to. Now the way to do that, see if I can get a good picture in there. There we go. Is I need to apply compressed air up top here to each of these. And when I do that, that should open and close those slides. So I'm going to go get some compressed air. Just go down the line, and we do that to all of them. All right, do those look good? Alrighty, so my carburetors are leak-free. Got no gas coming from anywhere. And as you saw, all those opened up, which means that they're making a good tight seal inside these caps. If I found that they didn't rise when I applied air pressure, that just means that I had something kinked and it wasn't able to form a tight seal so that diaphragm could actually inflate. That's all it's doing, is that diaphragm is just inflating and pulling that slide up. Alrighty, so to install the carburetors, first thing I hooked up is the choke cable. That's just simply looping that cable end in to the actuator there and then pulling it. I just pulled out on it, routed that cable in behind there, and then you just push back in on it, and that is your choke cable installed. Now to install the throttle cables, what you want to do, first you want to come up here and you want to twist the throttle on and off, and as you're doing that you want to see which cable pulls and which cable pushes. So this cable pulls, this cable pushes. So you want to see down here which way this needs to run. So if I come down here and I reach the throttle arm, I see that it needs to be pulled up. So this cable needs to go on the side down here that gets pulled up. So if you look, it's going to be the cable that goes here. Right there. So it's going to be routed around this cable. Since it pulls, it's going to be routed on this side, and this cable, since it pushes, it's going to be routed on that side. Alrighty, so I have those cables hooked up, and I know they're routed correctly because when I roll on the throttle, it opens. Go on, it opens and it closes. Now if you get it backwards, what will end up happening is you'll actually roll on the throttle this way. So you want to roll on the throttle this way, not that way. I've done that before, so it's not something that is hard to do, but just pay attention when you're putting that together to get that to roll on the right way. Now we just got to set these carburetors down in their final resting place. Alrighty, so now we have the throttle linkage hooked up, throttle cables are on, choke cables on. We are going to just drop these carburetors in. Now, the reason I put the lift down to do this is because you really want to apply a lot of downward pressure on these carburetors to get them to seat into the carburetor boots. Now I just have to tighten it up, hook up my fuel line, stuff like that, and then drop the air box on, and we'll fire this thing up and see what it sounds like. Alrighty guys, moment of truth. I always get nervous when this time comes, but here goes nothing. Time to see if she cranks over and roars to life. I have the wheel off the ground so that we can actually work the transmission, but let's see. No leaks. That sounds good. Now let's actually shift it. First gear. Second gear. Third gear. Got all the gears. That's good. Gonna have to mess around with the carburation a little bit to get it set up right, but she sounds good. Awesome. Hopefully you guys, if you've been following along and you're doing this yourself, hopefully you get to this point and it sounds just as good as this does. Well, I'm hoping that yours sounds better. I still have to mess with the carburation, but hopefully it's running, shifting gears, and doing everything it needs to do. I am excited that this thing started up and ran. Now it does run rough. I'm gonna have to adjust that, but runs, sounds healthy, revs up, doesn't burn any oil, so I got the pistons in the cylinders correctly. Didn't break any rings putting it together. Transmission, as you saw, works perfect. Now, I don't know if it actually fixed the second gear issue, but I'm fairly certain it did because we replaced all the broken parts that were involved with second gear. If you guys are following along at home and you're doing something similar to a bike you have, hopefully you got it to this point and you know it's running and sounding healthy. Now, this does need the carburetor adjusted, but it is something I will do in the future. But I'm going to put it back together and I'm going to go take it for a ride. Thanks for checking the video out, guys. We'll see you in the next one.